Good evening, everybody. Good morning for some of you. So, my name is Jonathan. I am a senior project engineer working with Cargill in one of their factories in South India. So, I work in a liquid glucose manufacturing facility. I've been working there for the last 5 years. And this is basically the GRE was essentially written with the intention of me going to business school. So I actually started doing the GMAT because at the time when I started preparing for business school, I was under the pretense that the GMAT was the only one that would be considered. Uh, and I don't think the GRE really caught on by around that time. So I did the GMAT. I did it 4 times actually because I was not very happy with my score. And I think I plateaued at 680 on the GMAT. I scored a Q49 and a V34. So the math was fine, but my verbal was not improving. Uh, and the thing was that I felt that it didn't make any sense to go and do a fifth time. So I had spoken to a few people and they had insisted that I go and do the GRE. And I decided to do a mock test. Actually, I did a mock test before attempting to actually study for it. Straight out of my straight out of GMAT academics or whatever it is, I scored 307, I believe a 317 in total. So it was okay. I mean, the way I looked at it was that it was great as a good startup, and compared to now where I scored a 332, I think that was a big improvement, a good 15-point improvement. So I think that was good. And I started my GRE preparation in the month of January. So I took advantage of those end of year sales where in December there was a good sale on TTP. So I decided I'm going to take it up. I'm going to, let's see, because I needed a bit of time for me to go, and considering that the first round was in September, I decided I need to get everything sorted out as early as possible and to start my preparation and to give the exam as early as possible, but also keeping in mind that I need to account for how well prepared I am. So before TTP, I just went through a few of the books. I went through the verbal guide and I went through the math quant guide as well, just to get an understanding. And I found that the quant was relatively similar to the GMAT. In fact, I found it much easier because I feel that, and I think a lot of people agree with me that the GRE math is a lot more textbook, whereas GMAT is much more logical. So I think it was easier for me. So I thought, but at the same time, I thought I might as well get a very holistic and a better understanding of things because if that 317, I didn't feel my math was sufficient. I was scoring, I think, 161 on that. So I wasn't very happy with my math. So I decided I might as well go for the TTP whole thing, both math and verbal. I'm a big Redditor. So I came across TTP when I was on Reddit. People swear by it. People say that it's very good. And I think from the reviews, it came across that TTP was very honest. Like they were not selling you a pipe dream. They were not selling you. You didn't get that feeling that these were a bunch of sleazy salesmen who were just trying to make a big buck. Like you genuinely felt that okay, they really wanted to make a system that really helped people like me, or to help any student or prospective MBA or anybody who wanted to do the GMAT or do the GRE. So it was a good impression. And then I went through the testimonials and then I went through Reddit. And Reddit is relatively honest because there's no filter, so to say. So I was going through various subreddits and looking through the GRE subreddit, the GMAT subreddit, and I went through it and I felt, okay, this is pretty good. It seems pretty good. And I decided to go for it. So I purchased the TTP 4-month course for the GRE in December, late December, and I started in early Jan with my preparation. I used the GRE 4 months. April. I finished it in April. So I finished. So I think I was able to speed through it relatively because my math was very strong. I was coming from GMAT preparations. My math was very strong, and TTP is to a very large extent math oriented. So there's a huge amount of math to learn. So I felt I was able to speed through it in 4 months relatively quickly, and the verbal as well. I was able to go through it quite well. I felt that the verbal was a lot easier compared to GMAT verbal. So I was able to get through everything in about 4 months. Regarding preparation, so the thing was that I have a very hectic work schedule. So I was working 6 days a week. And my biggest worry was that I would not have the right strategy when I approached the GRE. There is so much material available There is the 5 pound Manhattan book. There is Magoosh books. There is Princeton Review books. There are books from the GRE club. There are questions from the GRE club. And there are the official guides. Then there are official practice tests. There are the unofficial practices. There were so many things that you could do, so many permutations and combinations, and I didn't want to be in a state where I was wondering, okay, the next day, what am I going to do? So I think the best thing DTP gave me was this schedule. They said, okay, whether you're starting from scratch or whether you're really good at what you do, it is they highly recommend that you go through the entire course. There is a plan. There is, especially the map, so it's structured properly. And considering these guys are teachers themselves, so they obviously know a thing or two about a correct medium on how to instruct people. So I liked that part of it. I felt like I was gradually progressing through difficulty levels, so to say, even though there were different subjects, but I felt like gradually, I was moving up. And it's a very similar thing with verbal as well. You get this impression that you're starting off with a relatively easy topic, but you're starting off with the foundation and then you're gradually building up on it. And they keep reiterating you to do these tests to gauge your performance. And the explanations also, if you got something wrong, the explanations are really good in the sense that it was easy to understand. Whereas if, like, for example, if you were to look at official books, those explanations can be a bit difficult to understand. Whereas that was not the case with TTP. I think it's designed to be as simplistic as possible, but at the same time getting everything encapsulated within the explanation. So that's a good thing. I felt, and that's one of the most important things that you can do. It's not about what you get right; it's more about what you get wrong. And once you do get it wrong, how are you going to, you could say, make sure that mistake doesn't happen again, or at least you're going to minimize the chances of that mistake. And the ability to understand where you went wrong and the ability to track your errors. Error tracking was very helpful uh, because it also keeps things in perspective. So when you do the GRE, there are some topics which are significantly more pronounced in the GRE, whereas some topics are barely touched. Of course, the TTP doesn't look at it that way. It says do everything. We don't want to put you in a situation where just on the off chance that you do get a question from a topic that's not very common, that you just sit there not knowing with your hands under your bum. I think the preparation regarding what aspects made the TTP course very helpful to me is again that 6 day working week, very difficult to strategize and to find out a path. It delineates everything very easily. It's a very simple interface. Uh, you know, you don't need much of a brain, if I'm being very honest, to access it. It's very straightforward. It's very accessible. It makes a lot of sense also, and it is very helpful. It tells you what you need to do, and that's very important for people like me. I'm not a very good test taker at all, as evidenced by the fact that I took the GMAT 4 times. I'm not at all a good one. I don't believe that on my own I could devise a strategy of my own, like which subjects or which topics I needed to approach first, which topics I need to approach last. I think that was probably the best thing that they gave it to me. And I think when I look at my journey using TTP, I was starting, so I would say I started on a better footing than most people because I'm not starting from scratch, I was starting from the GMAT. But then I was still under the impression that because I wasn't satisfied with my GMAT score, that I had a lot to learn. So I kept that in mind and I was constantly learning. So while I was at work, I would say that vocabulary was probably a big thing to pick up because that's not there tested in the GMAT as such. So I had to learn a lot of vocabulary. TTP offers a great vocabulary list, which is reasonably comprehensive. Uh, I would go and I used to go on a bus to my work factory. So I work in a factory. I would work in the morning. I would go in the mornings. I would study verbal lists, the TTP lists while I was there in the morning. And then I would do math questions while I was during my lunch break. Anytime I had free time, I would do that. And it was very helpful that I could access it on my system. I would just quickly go through it and then it would leave it. Sometimes I would leave a test midway because I had some other urgent work while I was at work. I wouldn't recommend that, but it was very helpful that that option is there for you to pause a test. And it was very accessible for me. So I was able to do it while I was working, even while I was at the factory. So that was something very helpful. That was my journey regarding the TTP. Uh, Now, regarding my personal advice, so I would divide it into two. There's preparation based advice and there's test based advice. Regarding your preparation based advice, I would always suggest to people that you take a test you first figure out whether the GRE is right for you if you're going to the MBA, if you're going for an MBA program like I was, because I think the biggest mistake I made was not doing the GRE first, because I think I was obviously better at it. I think the first thing that you can do is you need to figure out what kind of programs you're trying to get into, figure out what kind of scores that you need, and then accordingly do a test, figure out where you stand. I think that's a very, and you need to replicate test conditions as well as possible. I would say that's probably one of the biggest things I can do. I can tell you, and make sure you keep some time, because I did started the GRE prep in January, but I gave my exam on the June 20th. So that's a 6 month time break, and I was studying in between. So I took 6 months. Again, I was working 6 days a week, so it may take, and I'm not very good in tests, so maybe it takes much shorter for better people. But with that being said, you need to give a good amount of time for your preparation. I would highly suggest that you don't think to yourself, okay, I've got 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Unless you're coming from a really strong, really, really strong, and you've got like a mock test to back you up, I would highly suggest that you consider 2 or 3 months at a minimum. And again, this is based on your performance and it's based on your final goals and what you wish to achieve. I didn't have an intention to score a 330 plus. I was getting 325 plus in all my mock tests. I scored 330 in one mock test and a 331 in the other. I've done all five of the official GRE tests, and I only scored out of the five, two times have I scored a 330 and 330 above. But with that being said, it took me 6 months. So it's always good to keep that in mind. And you also need to keep in mind, in case you didn't get a score that you wanted, or was not, it doesn't meet the averages of your programs, you would maybe need to do it again. So you need to keep a study time for that, and you need the preparation time for that. So it's always better to be prepared, and to keep a good buffer point. Regarding while at the test, the best advice I can give anybody would do not focus on what is the difficulty of the test. When you go on Reddit, there are a lot of people who said, yeah, the first mock test is easier, or they will say things like the actual GRE is much tougher than the tests. I would say it's all very subjective. It is very subjective. You take a lot of factors. It's, if you want to be mathematical about it, it's a multivariable equation. You can take stress, and that may impact your performance. You have plenty of people swearing by the fact that they scored very high in their mock tests, and in the actual exam they went far. It was much lower. Whereas I'm another extreme. My highest score was in the actual test than in the mock test. So it's a very subjective thing. Do not put that pressure on yourself and think to yourself, while you're doing the exam, this question is easy. Obviously, I didn't do the first one good. You should just be focusing on the question at hand. Do not focus on whether it's easy or not. You should just be focusing on how do I get this done as quickly as possible, because your brain is focusing on two faculties. You're focusing on getting this done, and you're focusing on getting the actual question done. You're focusing on handling that stress and the test, which is not a good idea. Make sure that you just focus on the test, and you'll find that in hindsight, whatever you felt, you might feel that if you follow this, you'll find that your score were much better than what you predicted. I was thinking to myself, this math was so tough, but much tougher than while I was doing the test. But I got the same score as when I was in the power prep test, and I felt the verbal was tougher. But at the same time, I scored my highest verbal score in the test. So I would say keep that in mind. Don't worry too much about while you're doing the test. I would suggest you keep your worries ahead of the test when during the preparation phase. That's probably the best advice I can give anybody here. Ultimately, I would say TTP is a very good way to go, especially if you're like me, you're not very good in tests, you need a strategy, you need to really brush up. If you're aiming for that 320 score, or if you're one of those candidates who didn't have a very good GPA, and you wanted to really, really like impress a potential admissions officer and say, yeah, this is my score, I would highly suggest you go for TTP, because I would say that it's probably meant for people who are aiming for that 325 plus. And it's also variable. You can decide the difficulty, but I would always say that it is very good for people who want to get that 325 plus, and for some people who want to get that 330 plus as well. So for me, it's a great program. And I would probably say one of the best things about it was not only that you get the course, but I was able to speak with Scott and Jeff, the founders. Jeff was very kind. He was willing to, when I was getting out of the GMAT, I was so dejected. I was so worried about my future. And then I messaged him on email, and then I told him that this was my situation, and then he was very helpful. He called me a few days later. We spoke about it. He told me what I should be doing. He told me about that I should be taking those power play tests, and they don't get any money out of it, right? It's just out of the kindness of their heart that they're doing it. So that was very wonderful. I would say that's a very good thing. The ability to get a support system is very important. So I would say, yeah, you know, uh, it's a wonderful program run by wonderful people, and obviously, it made me feel really wonderful seeing that score on my board, on the screen. I was so elated. So go TTP. I would always suggest anybody who's very serious about going and doing well on the GRE to take TTP. So good luck to anybody, and I hope TTP helps you as much as it did help me.